Hey everybody, KC here. So the other day I had a chance to engage in a Zoom conversation with Scott Moses. Now, Scott is the managing director at PJ Solomon and head of their grocery, pharmacy, and restaurant practice. And listen, I've known Scott for a number of years. There's almost nobody out there who has a better sense of the industry. He understands the economics of it. He understands the challenges that so many retailers are going through. He takes a really strong kind of big picture look at the industry and yet is able to see not just the forest but the trees. And I think that's a really important skill to have. Whenever I hang out with Scott, whenever I talk to Scott, I end up feeling smarter. He was nice enough to give me some time the other day, and so we recorded it. It's a Zoom conversation. I'm actually going to break it up into two pieces. Part one will run today, part two will run tomorrow, and I hope you enjoy it. So, Scott, great to see you. My first question has to be, how have you been dealing with the pandemic? I hope everybody is safe, everybody's healthy.
Yeah, we're doing okay. And when you think about what's happening out there, all the lives lost, lives disrupted, the way our way of life is really changing. We are incredibly fortunate. We live in Manhattan, and so when this hit, we were really cautious, and we stayed holed up in our building, and we didn't leave for well over 2 months. We got all of our groceries delivered. We cooked every meal, and we did like everybody else. We did what we could to try to be safe. And you know, I think a lot about um, stories my grandparents used to tell me about the Depression and about the war and the sacrifices that people make or made. And then I juxtapose that with what we've seen our sector do over the past few months and the way that they have risen up to this challenge to feed Americans 21 meals a week, over 300 million people. That's 6 billion meals. And to do so while keeping their team safe, keeping their customers safe, changing the supply chain to make it work. And I marvel at that. I know we've talked in the past about how our sector, supermarkets are pillars of thousands of American communities. We've really seen that here over the past bunch of months. And I always remember that they're the last ones to leave in a crisis, the first ones to get back in, true salt of the earth. And when you think about the sacrifices that they've done, the work that they've done to rise up and meet this challenge, it makes the sacrifices that we've made seem really, really small.
I do think that the comparison to to the depression is apt. I do think that this is an entire generation that is going to think of themselves as being pandemic babies. Um,
Yeah.
and not just because they were born because their parents were locked up for their first 6 months,
Yeah.
but people who who didn't have their high school graduations, didn't have their college graduations, and dealt with a very specific set of circumstances that hopefully, well, I mean, character is forged through difficulty, not through ease. And so I think there's an entire generation out like that. So in your business, and you're in the mergers and acquisition business, I mean, that's what you do. Um, have you seen, how has that sector fared? I mean, clearly there've been some deals that we've seen during the pandemic. Does it continue to be active? Does the geography of the pandemic affected it all? And I'm curious, like, were people in the Northeast during March, April, and May thinking about deals, or were they just hanging on for dear life? And at the same time, like right now, are people in Florida and Texas and Arizona and California, are they thinking about deals, or are they just sort of, we got to get to the other end of this and then we'll think about that?
Yeah, I'll tell you that there hasn't been a geographic correlation with the work we're doing or not doing. We literally were selling Fairway. We did a virtual auction in late March. Now, to be fair, that was on a track, and that timeline wasn't going to be changed. But it tells you something about what people, the lengths to which people will move to make things happen when they have to. Big picture, though, I think it's important to remember. Um, Dealing with folks all around the country, their first priority every day is keeping people safe, the team in the stores and customers. And while there's always going to be strategic folks at a company who are responsible for implementing a strategy, for thinking about what's coming around the corner. And that's where we work with folks. It has been crystal clear to us that everyone's been laser focused on the top priority, which is keeping people safe.
Are CEOs that you talk to, are they generally thinking that the world will return to some level of normality as we used to think of it? Or do they tend to think in terms of, no, the world is going to be, it is being reshaped in some fundamental ways by what we're going through now, both pandemic and whatever recession is going to emerge from that? Where do the people that you talk to seem to fall?
Well, I think there are two components, right? There's the sales component, and then there's the delivery component. From a sales perspective, everybody recognizes that demand has been extraordinary. And I think there is a general view, and I share this view, that the pretty robust degree of demand is going to continue for some time. You've got all around the country millions of new chefs, in our house included. And we used to order in delivery, I'm ashamed to say, 5-6 days a week, 2 working parents. That was our life. Now we cook every meal. And I think a lot of those habits for a lot of folks are going to stick. Second, in an elevated unemployment environment, there's always a shift toward food at home. People always want to try to save money on food. And now here, of course, the third factor is restaurant demand is going to be depressed for quite some time. And even when things ultimately shift and we continue to bend the curve around the rest of the country, as a practical matter, it's going to be really hard for folks to eat outside and eat at a distance once it gets colder.
Well,
and
feel confident in the experience. I mean, I know you went to your first restaurant since the pandemic started just the other night, and you confided to me that you just didn't feel completely comfortable.
I love restaurants, okay, and I will tell you, I am very sensitive to the fact that there are over 10 million folks in this country who work in restaurants, okay, and I grew up in college. I put myself through college as a bartender. Had I not been able to do that, I don't know how I would have eaten. It was the best deal going. I'd get a free meal with every shift, and it's how I got money. It's how I ate. I can't even imagine what it must be like for most restaurant employees around the country who can't open and have some outside dining, which we were able to do. I will tell you, yeah, I was uncomfortable. And this is something, and I'm a New Yorker. So I'm a New Yorker and I do what I do for a living. So I'm always thinking about issues. That's my job. And I noted a lot of them during that experience. And this is one person's opinion. I think, and having spoken with other folks who've done the same, I think grocery sales are going to be robust for some time for that reason.
Yeah, now, I'm with you. I'm not there yet. I haven't not been to a restaurant or a bar since February 25th.
Yeah,
which is like, really? I mean, that's a complete change in terms of my life. So I'm with you. I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of room for continued growth in the supermarket sector if they manage it right. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of retailers. I mean, I think that retailers, to me, fall into sort of two camps, and I'm going to make this more black and white than it probably is. But there are retailers who have sort of see this as an opportunity to do what they do better and also do new things and be increasingly relevant and resonant to their customers, and recognize that it's an ongoing challenge, right? They have to continue to reinvent themselves. And then there are some retailers who have just had the best quarters of their lives, and they're like the guy who was born on second base and thinks he hit a double, right? And so the first camp, they're the ones who I think who will continue to grow, and the second camp, they're not doing what they need to do to continue to be viable.
Well, you're right, and here's the question, right? When you think about just how much incremental revenue, how much incremental cash flow has been generated in this sector in the last few months, it raises a fundamental question. What do you do with that capital? Do you pay down debt? Do you take money off the table? Or do you use this incredibly unexpected moment in time to
And just so
Just
you know,
incredibly
we lost your camera for a second. That's okay. This is
yeah.
live.
So we'll just keep going.
This is the Zoom generation, right? We're all used to it.
I rejected a call. Don't know who it is. I hope it's not a client.
No.
So what I was saying is, the question is what they do with that cash flow, right? Because there has been a fundamental change, an acceleration, for example, in online adoption, and we've talked a lot about the implications on that for the sector. I'll just say there isn't enough online capacity right now. Amazon and Walmart have benefited in an extraordinary way. Amazon just reported their grocery business tripled. Walmart is obviously doing incredibly well. And then you've got Instacart, who I read had 57% online grocery share in April or May. Now, what's interesting about that is, well, look.
No, listen, I get it. I mean,
this is
brilliant.
This is the topic du jour in boardrooms. Okay, how do I handle this change in how customers expect to be served? So I will say, Instacart has served a great role for a number of grocers around the country. But in those articles, what I find interesting is you don't read about the various grocers where that share has been taken from. You don't read about the brand loyalty, the generations of deep affection that families have had for fill in the blank regional supermarket. And you don't read about the fairly extraordinary opportunity in generating data revenue and vendor advertisement revenue that Walmart is capitalizing on, Amazon is capitalizing on, and of course Instacart is capitalizing on. There's an argument that says Instacart is not in business to sell you carrots and chickpeas. They are in the business for those revenue streams. And Walmart and Amazon have clearly gotten the memo, because in addition to making their investment in online capacity, what they're also doing is they've built out these marketplace platforms that are another great way for them to capitalize on having an endless aisle and taking just a small fraction of the revenue related to those transactions in stuff that they don't even sell. They're leveraging their traffic. Now that, when you think about just how much traffic grocers generate around the country, that is an enormous opportunity that those three guys are capitalizing on. Unclear whether other grocers are going to use this newfound cash flow to do the same.
Well, and to go back to what you said a minute ago, and I completely understand wanting to pay down debt. It makes total sense. But it also makes sense to me to take some of that money and invest. And if you're a retailer who's doing business with Instacart, you're really not investing. You're outsourcing it. I don't want to go too far down the Instacart rabbit hole because I spend way too much of my time there. But you're not investing in it. You're just outsourcing it and getting a check and putting your value proposition at risk. And those would be the retailers, and there are big retailers and small retailers doing it. Right? There are 5-store retailers that are doing it, and then Costco just signed the other day a deal to do Instacart across Canada. So it's not a big versus small issue, but to me there's just a fundamental question about whether or not companies are going to use this moment to. I mean, one of the things I think I wrote about from the very beginning was, listen, retailers ought to have what Jeff Bezos calls 2 pizza teams, right? It's so small that you can feed it with 2 pizzas. Figuring out how is the company going to be fundamentally different coming out of the pandemic than we were going in. And if they're not having those hard discussions, then they run the risk of not positioning themselves for the future. And I think that's a real danger.
You're right. And look, I don't want to beat up on Instacart too much, but I'll tell you one story. When I was a younger banker back at JP Morgan, we advised, back when I did more than just grocery, we advised Borders bookstores on a potential sale, an attempted sale. It was about 12 years ago. And the challenge we had was about 12 years before that, Borders had outsourced its online fulfillment for this new thing called the World Wide Web that not everybody really understood.
To a little company called Amazon. Yeah.
To this little company that seemed to know something about how to serve people online. voluntarily, voluntarily, they let another company come between them and their most valuable asset, their relationship with their customers. And you know how the story ended.
In essence, didn't Toys R Us do the same thing? I mean, it took longer for the inevitable end, but I think you could probably make the argument that Toys R Us, by outsourcing its e-commerce business to Amazon, that was the beginning of the end for what we think of as being Toys R Us.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't.